Good afternoon. We will begin our webinar in just a minute. Good afternoon. I'm Rob Grimes, the CEO of the IFBTA and your moderator for today. And today's webinar, Live at Your Table, is on leveraging technology and integration for a multi-concept and multi-unit space. Now a little bit about the IFBTA before we get started. The IFBTA, or the International Food and Beverage Technology Association, is a not-for-profit industry trade association that is focused on, you guessed it, food and beverage technology, hence our session today. The IFBTA has chapters, including a virtual chapter in many cities, which for right now are meeting virtually as well, but also hosts events at major industry events around the world, but in the United States and in North America and also in the UK with some of the major regional and national trade shows and other events. The IFBTA has a certification program to teach people who are interested in technology within the food and beverage industry about all the different aspects on a very impartial basis. There are 20 modules, about 60 videos within that, and we would urge you to look into that if you're interested in learning more about technology after this session. The IFBTA has global reach and has many industry partnerships, including the one today with the Western Food Service Expo and also Clarion Events and Tech Bites, which is putting this on. But now a few housekeeping items. So first of all, if you have questions, and we are going to have a Q&A session today, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. When you submit a question, you can go ahead and say it's for a specific panelist or for everybody, or you don't have to put anything and we'll just know it's for everybody. I will be collecting those questions during the session, and then we'll moderate those sessions during the open Q&A period. If we do not get to all of the Q&A, we will go ahead and distribute the Q&A questions to the panelists, and we will go ahead and try to answer and respond to as many as we can offline. We would ask that you stay away from any questions that regard sales and pricing, any political discussions, or any kind of disparaging remarks. You are muted during this. You can use the chat function if you want to share comments or communicate with the panel, but again, Q&A is absolutely the best way to do it. And at the end of this session, I will remind you of this, that there is a recording of the webinar which you can download and listen to from foodandbeverageshows.com, as well as the ifbta.org and on other partner websites and social media. Now, before we get started, we have a special sponsor today of Square, and I'd like to go ahead and just introduce Square by the following video.
The word entrepreneur means a great deal. It means that you're in charge. It also means that you have the creative mind to make your business happen, to build it from the ground up. Those qualities draw people in to be able to teach, to be able to nurture, because for so long in the food and wine industry, females were disregarded. So it's my duty to support, most importantly, our community, because at this point, people's livelihoods and their dreams are at risk because of this pandemic. It has become so very important that we rise as a community and that we join together to protect each other. We're so much stronger than if we were to stand on our own.
All the different challenges and things, and how Square has really been helping businesses during this in order to be able to provide third-party software that they sync with a variety of the different applications, which became very important as people put in things at the last minute here, but also their contactless solutions for food and beverage not only are important right now during the pandemic, but I would believe are going to be the same going forward. And I want to thank Square for sponsoring this session and actually the other sessions during the Live at Your Table. So now let me go ahead and introduce our speakers to you. And if our panelists will turn off there we go. And Peter, and we're looking for you, Todd. So we have a cross panel today from some different segments, from what some would call the on-site segment, some would call non-traditional food service, but anybody knows these are multi-concept operators. And anybody who has to operate in a multi-concept environment in a single location always has a challenge. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, are some of those opportunities and challenges. Now, I know from our audience that we have people that are probably in this business, or we have operators that want to be in this business. And as our panelists will talk to today, and we'll make sure that we cover this, it's not all about just being franchisees or having licensing agreements with the big, with the big enterprise chains, but also a lot of independents, and that's very important as well. And so we're going to talk about some of the challenges, and also some of the challenges as you might go into an environment or work with other different operators, or go into a single environment in the type of multi-concept world. So our speakers today come from Aramark and SSP America. I'm actually going to let Peter and Todd introduce themselves. So Peter, we're going to start with you. And if you would, I would like you to go ahead and just introduce yourself and go ahead and tell us a little bit about your company and how you work in the environment. And if you have some initial perspectives, they may be used against you later, so feel free to put those in as well. Peter?
Thanks, Rob. So good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Hope everyone is doing well, safe, and happy. So my name is Peter Zimbach. I'm the Global Vice President of Aramark's digital incubator called Emerge. And my job in Aramark is to really take this, kind of legacy hospitality industry and really start to redefine it, reinvent it with digital at the forefront of what we do. Aramark, for those who don't know us, we are, again, we operate in multiple businesses across the world, from everywhere you go to enjoy a game, learn at school, get well in a hospital, education, K through 12, and of course, where you go to work, in 19,000 locations across almost 20 different countries. Aramark is that kind of, experience in that multi-site experience. And, what we really focus on, though, at the core of what we do is to really enable amazing experiences for our consumers day in and day out. No matter where you are, what you're doing, you should have a really wonderful time wherever you are. And we're trying to do that really with digital at the head. So it's really exciting to be here. It's on the panel. Hopefully can share a little bit of insights that, while to Rob's point, it is certainly comes with its challenges. It's an amazing opportunity done well for you to really drive a sustainable and high growth focused business. So looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you, Peter. And Todd Kaufman?
Thanks, Rob. My name is Todd Kaufman. I'm the Vice President of IT at SSP America. I know many of you might not be familiar with SSP America. We run about 400 restaurants and about 38 different airports in the US and Canada. We're actually part of a global SSP group, which operates in about 35 different countries all over the world. We do focus in the US entirely on airports, and in the world we do airports and rail. To Peter's point, it's a very unique experience, a unique market. We try to bring a lot to improve to the airport experience, especially for the consumers. Our goal has always been to use technology and to use different kind of agreements and to bring a real, true, different taste of place to where you're going. So at every place you go, you're not just getting down with the same burger and fries and airport food, but you can actually experience the uniqueness of the city or town or country you're in and enjoy that food. So I'm happy to be here, and I hope to add some insight and be able to answer any and all questions.
Great. Well, thank you for the introduction. So we're going to go ahead and go into our open session. And then I would remind you that if you have questions that you would like to submit, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom. Well, you know, the obvious first question for me is I'm not exactly sure that all of the people attending this webinar understand the scope and the breadth of the areas that you serve. So how many individual brands do you each represent?
So I'll start with Peter. I see him doing math in his head.
I know.
I won't give an exact number. I don't even know it. It changes constantly. We have 200, and at last I checked, it was about 235, 240 unique concepts that we run. Now that can be anywhere from our own internal brands to a franchise. We could be a franchisee, or we can be a licensee. A lot of our agreements are also just some joint venture partners where we just partner with a local brand and that only has 1 or 2 restaurants, and we can bring their uniqueness to the airport.
Peter?
I'm gonna have a less sophisticated answer than Todd. We have a lot. You know, it's, you know, again, because we, you know, like we have national brands, we've got, you know, franchisee, you know, franchise brands. We've even, by the way, developed technology where we are allowed to, we bring in local brands on a daily basis. So we can have, we've now, you know, made that even a more expansive space so that we can bring not just the kind of national, you know, great brands that are just, you know, all over the country or world, but we can bring the local places that you'd love to go to every day. So I said, to not know the number, it really is a number that's pretty big.
But people see those.
And math was the hard part for me in college.
Right. Well, when you go to like a ballpark, you know, and see a baseball game, you know, the stadiums for the stadiums are filled with local brands as well in there, but you may manage that.
Exactly. And the same thing, by the way, we do the same thing in a business account too. You know, there's a great pizza place that you may love, or, you know, whatever that is, you know, restaurant that you grew up with, and supporting local restaurants is important to us, you know, to really do that, because it's something that's also very fun and engaging and different. And so if you can create a different experience through leveraging those, and by the way, we're doing it by putting technology at the front end to get to them, you know, it can be a really great way to expand, you know, give great opportunity, but not necessarily have to create much more complexity.
So let's go ahead and dissect this, and we're going to go, let's start at the big side, and then we're going to take a look at the different, because we've got a number of different complexities here, and I'm sort of thinking in terms of 4 boxes. You know, you got the number of the big brands, then you have the independents, and then you also have different types of operations, because I'm sure it's not exactly the same in an airport as is a college, as it is in a university. So let's try to hit a little bit on each of them. So let's start at the top of the big ones. So when you guys are working with a larger brand that has its own company specifications for technology, how does that work with you? Because you're operating environments where you also have your own specifications, and you need to pull multi-concept information and things together. Todd, you're shaking your head, so you get to go first.
It's a good question, and that approach actually starts really when you go into the agreement with them, right? It needs to be outlined. Every major brand will have some section about IT, and it's very careful not to just rubber stamp these, just accept them as boilerplate language, but to actually read it and show what it is. Do they require a certain POS? Are you allowed to use any POS? Do you have to feed into their accounting system? Do you have to feed into their back office system? Can you report it separately? Do you have to use their mobile ordering apps? If so, how do you have to interface it? Do you have to use their gift cards? Do you have to accept their gift cards? Do you have to sell their gift cards? All of that is usually outlined in the very early stages of the beginning of the agreement. And not that you want a relationship where you're always going back to pointing to, you know, section 8, paragraph 3B, anything like that. But it is the starting point where you have those discussions, so you make sure you understand everybody's on the same page. Which of your technology are we going to use? Which of our technology are we going to use? And how are we going to get the information to you? At the end of the day, what they really want is a good customer experience and the right information. You can show that you can provide that information using your tools or their tools. You can provide that same level of service so the customer can come to expect, especially because you are representing their brand. If you can do that, we find the brands mostly to be pretty flexible in that. But it is an important lesson plan, especially when you're talking bigger brands. They will have the regional operators who won't be, or the regional or say supervisors, regional managers that might not be as familiar, obviously, with your contract as they are with the street side. And it's important to show that you're still providing that same kind of service, the same kind of level of technology, and still able to get that information there.
Peter, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, look, I think Todd said it right on. I think first and foremost, it's about creating a great customer experience. The technology, it should not matter. Say it doesn't matter. It should not matter in this day and age. Yours is better, whichever one can drive the outcomes you need, which is great consumer experiences, which create great consumer engagement, which creates affinity, which creates, like that's what you want. So, while I think there is still this situation, Todd and I live this day in and day out, where certain brands will say, you got to use our stuff. Like if there's a valid reason why we shouldn't use it, we just have to have the data. You've got to be prepared with the data to say why not.
Right.
It's a hit or miss. I would say I think companies still believe, want to pound their chest and say, my stuff is better. You have to use it without reasons why. I think, look, as you get smarter with the use of data, you can now pick that argument. At the end of the day, gets more transactions. We shouldn't care, right? Technology should never be the thing that is like the guidance of what you have to do. The consumer has to be at the front of that.
So, Peter, let's stick with that. So first of all, I just want to recap what both of you just said on this. In reality, the experience is key. And obviously the food quality and the overall presentation and things, is key to the brand. It's the brand essence, right? Mm-hmm. So you got to maintain that. At the same time, any brand that's going to operate needs information. And it's not about information to collect their royalties or something, but it's information in order to know what products are selling regionally and to help you as an operator. So I think we can agree that those two things and the technology itself, the point of sale and things like that may or may not actually impact that being able to do that. However, what happens when the brand has loyalty and it has gift cards and things? And of course, I can think of a certain coffee chain that a lot of people use the mobile apps for. It doesn't always work in the airports or the stadiums or the universities and things like that. So what happens when that is part of the expectation of the consumer who's using it, Peter? How do you deal with that?
When you don't have it?
Yeah, or do you always make sure you have it?
Like I think, certain, large coffee chains with great coffee all over the country aside, you want to try to have, if it's valuable, you should have it. I think that, there is parts that come into play. I mean, the thing with when you get into rewards and loyalty, you get into financial and accounting principles and things like that have to take place. There is, some things that cause that to be an issue. How do you reconcile those purchases from you versus purchases from others? It's a struggle that, though, I think we're all kind of getting through, and companies are working their way through it, including, such big, coffee companies where we're actually getting to that point where we can do all the things. Like you can get your points and redeem them in different places. So, I think the model complexity is still there. I think that it is less, at least from my perspective, and I kind of defer to Todd too because he lives it. To me, the things when that comes into play, it's less a technical issue, it's more an accounting issue.
So I would also add that it's also good to go on with an open mind and to understand what the goal is. So when you talk about, loyalty cards, stuff like that, especially where it's very brand centric, where they push it, you have to decide what needs to happen to make this work. And in regards to that, I mean, often the gift cards, we go with a standalone solution, right? We want to be able to accept the gift cards. We want to be able to accept the loyalty points, but it's not going to be worth it for us to do it, the full-blown interface from a technology standpoint, when it's only going to be a small portion of our enterprise. And we do other interfaces, or we're taking up whatever the case may be. So sometimes we can go with standalone terminals and decide on operational, accounting and operational, to Peter's point, on how that gets reconciled. Sometimes it is the technology that we want to incorporate, and we can use other use for it, and we roll it in because it is such a big piece. Also, sometimes it's common sense. For a lot of our stuff, we've come in the habit of we redeem gift cards, but we don't sell them very often. And in truth, how many times have you walked into an airport and said, I'm going to buy a gift card for somebody at the airport? It's not a frequent thing.
Well, so having said that, just a second here, because now I know Peter's smiling. So the question is whether I'm about to say the same thing he may be smiling about. I think of airports, and many airports do compete as shopping malls. and shopping malls will sell gift cards. But I also believe at some of the stadiums and some other places, and if you think about gift cards or the things, and you think of a college campus university cards, right? There are some nuances here that actually make them very similar, including going to the stadium and being able to get different kinds of cards. So Peter, do you want to chime in on that one?
I was just laughing because I think Todd said, like, people don't go into the airport to think of gift cards, and as the procrastinator of every gift I ever buy my family, every flight from Dallas up to my hometown in Philadelphia is, oh my God, I got to buy some gift cards. But no, Todd's right. Like, you can't be all things to all people, but we do need, you do need to understand the kind of how the complexities and how you can serve as much as possible. It gets difficult again. I think, again, from the having other brands in, it becomes this accounting, challenge. Not to say it's not, something you should overcome. In fact, you're going to learn over time. We're going to have to overcome it. I think that's just something to kind of keep in mind. But it goes back to my whole thing of, look, if you understand your data and you understand who your consumer is, what they really do, the steps you need to take, and the ones that say, I'm just not going to take them right now.
And actually, I'm just going to jump in because Peter brings up a good point. While we're talking gift cards and mobile ordering and that kind of stuff, in our field, I imagine Peter has to deal a lot in the stadiums about, the e-cash and the student cards. And while in my world, we have to deal a lot with the vouchers, and every airline might have a different type of how they want to redeem vouchers or issue vouchers. And that becomes actually a bigger issue and a bigger challenge to address than just so much the brand gift card, so to speak. And that's where actually more of the energy gets focused on what's unique about our environment and what we have to be able to do technology-wise and accounting-wise and operational-wise.
So Todd, I'm going to let you moderate because you're bringing up some of the things there that I was just about to bring up. However, I don't want somebody who's watching this webinar to think that this is only about the big stadium, the big airport. Okay, this can be the small hospital. This can be a smaller university, a community college. It could be a food court, in a shopping center if you really want to look at it that way. So these challenges are not just about the big stuff that's there. I was going to point out one other thing, Todd, and point it to you, that you operate, and actually I'm sure, Peter, that Aramark does as well, in some environments which are very strict on data standards and on security that come from above, the operations, like an airport, with the wiring, universities and colleges have it. So that's an added complexity. A hospital must have that. That's an added complexity.
Yeah, it is. It's probably, if you're looking at, we talked about there a lot of the front end, what the customer experience is and what the brands expect. The back end is a huge chunk of that and where you spend your time, right? You can't just open up the phone book, find a contractor to come lay your cable and just do drop sealants and do whatever you want. You have to go through a whole process. You have to understand per airport, what their requirement is. And every airport is different. I wish there was a universal, but there's not. So every airport's different about, are they running their internal network? Is everybody on their own? If they are on their own, who can do it? Who follows the rules? Who's contracted to work in the airport? Who's got security clearance? You have issues where if things come up and things aren't done correctly, you need somebody out there real quick, even just to troubleshoot. It's usually, depending on the airport, it's usually not a way you can just call a contractor and have them show up. They usually need to send a photo ID 24 to 48 hours ahead of time, be cleared, make sure it's that person showing up, make sure they have an escort walking through. So it does add a huge level of complexity that you really have to understand for every single different place you're going into. What are the rules here? How do we have to follow? And you can start with a blueprint on how you're going to do it, but you have to be flexible and understand that every airport may have their own rules, and get a hold of the person that can talk about it. And that doesn't even touch the data piece, which is another piece depending on where you're working, which is just like the brands, which also want their hands on the data and be able to see it and how to get that information.
Right. So I'm going to guess, Peter, that you have some of the same challenges. So just if I could take that a step further here, because I did promise we would look at the smaller guys as well. You mentioned that you'll do pop-ups with independents locally.
Right.
When that happens, are you teaching your staff to do it and you're operating it, or are they operating it? And if they are operating it in your environment, how do you get them up to speed quickly in a pop-up to work within the things that you need to do to satisfy both the location as well as your own report?
So we do we have locations that, a local restaurant will come in themselves and run it, which is super fun. There's a consumer value there. If they know the person that does it, it's neat to see them come in. And then we have others that we will actually represent them, operate their brands. I think it's, we've done it so much. We've got a very solid process in how we do it. We make it very simple on them. The last thing we want to do, is, dump the huge corporate guidebook on them. Frankly, I don't want to dump it on myself. So, we make it very simple of, the safety, the basic things. By the way, restaurants know, right? How to operate safely, food safety, health, those types of things. From a point of sale perspective, we'll either do things, in a lot of cases, we do things for them, where we'll still bring in the tender and, run it through our own. Because to Todd's point, boy, one day when I grow up, I wish all our sites will be the same, even in the same segment. And tomorrow I'm going to realize it's never, ever going to happen. The model complexity, like to Todd's point, every airport's different. Every location we deal with is different. So we can bring it in and make it simple, from something as easy as just using our registers and they ring out, to if we do we've done kind of on the street type of pop-up things that are fun, where heck, you can leverage things like Square, nice and secure, and you can bring them in place where we can do it. And again, as long as we have the way to have data management, serve food safely, have a great thing, then it becomes relatively easy to execute.
Well, I think that there's a lot of different components there, but obviously making it easy for the operator, is something that is clearly something that you have to be able to do. What happens when you're? So I'm going to guess that you don't, either one of you, just don't have a person who's only trained in one concept in a multi-concept environment. Are there challenge? Do you have people that only do just one, like in a food court or in an airport or something, or do people move around, and what does that create on the staff side of the challenge?
So for us, I can tell you it's rare that somebody is only trained on one concept or brand, but it's not unheard of. And it depends on the brand. It depends on, again, the airport. It depends if they're union or not. It depends on the rules around it. So there are times where people are only trained or only work on one particular concept, or the expert or some brand insisted or whatever reason. And it's just something to be conscious of. I wouldn't say it makes it any harder or less harder. I mean, it still comes down to staffing. It still comes down to being able to move around. Of course, it's easier to be able to just use anybody anywhere and move them as needed. But of course, even when you have that flexibility, people get trained in certain concepts, certain expertise, and become better at that concept and working more at their place. So it is nice to have that flexibility, especially for our director of operations who usually run the airports, to know how it works and everything. But individually, it's still just a matrix that has to be figured out, just like anybody else does with staffing.
Okay, so you guys are both working in a lot of different types of concepts and things. Are there some key learnings that you've seen between either different types of concepts and things that you think just are really, I mean, you must get to see a lot, so you must see some really cool stuff. So are there some things that you get to see that other people don't get to see in your observations of how the technologies and different types of operations work together? I mean, not even all the vendors can see it that way, because many vendors are focused in certain silos.
Yeah, I think, I would say the good and the bad about what we do, right? Model complexity. We have more of it than anyone else. When you really think about it, folks like what Todd does in SSP and some others in this space, you have model complexity like nothing before. It is very hard to navigate, right? This brand has different rules than this brand, and this client is different than that client, and geographies and regulations and so on is enormous. The good part is it's enormous, and you got a lot of it. And so what you can ingest, if done well, if you can really pull and free the data and the insights the way that you can see it, it's amazing what you can know. We think about, just from our perspective, we know everything about a consumer from the day they're born till, quite honestly, till the day they die, and everything they do in between. And it's, when you look at that, it really gives you a great perspective that when somebody, what you learn about someone at work does matter when they go to a baseball game, and vice versa. And when they have a student in college or in high school, versus, kids out of the house or whatever. And understanding that data and appreciating it is so amazing because you can see a much broader view. I always said I used to play chess with my dad and he beat me every time, but it was always see the whole board. You can, in this space, you see the whole board versus just one segment. So, and by the way, it's more difficult, but I think if done right, you can see much more and it's more beneficial for you.
Well, and also you can compare data of different types of similar consumers in different environments, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the modeling aspect of it's amazing.
Also, I'd add that some of it is just fun, especially when it comes to the technology world. If I see a cool technology anywhere, I promise you I have some brand that can use it, right? That can test it, that can concept it. I don't care if it's for a bar, for quick service, for mobile ordering, for pickup, for virtual kiosk, you name it. We have a concept somewhere that this could really benefit from.
Right. So conversely, does that mean that as a company that you prefer to use off-the-shelf types of technologies, or have there been some things you just needed to do, you had to create your own?
It's a mixture. I personally I'm always much bigger. Nobody's going to pick a restaurant in an airport, SSP America, based on they have a really cool technology program, right? They're going for food and the experience. And so we don't build much here, but I also don't want to make it sound like we do off the shelf, because nothing in our environment is purely off the shelf, especially since we have, like you said, so many different brands, so many concepts, the integrations, the different process. So whatever we take off the shelf is going to need to be some tweaking, some changing. And by the way, that's not always for every vendor. So a lot of times we do talk to vendors that they have a cool technology, and after a conversation, we decide that they're just not going to be able to support us at this point, and we'll come back later, maybe as they grow longer, or we take the idea and see if anybody else has that same kind of idea. But at the flip side, it is really cool being able to see any kind of technology and say, hey, let's give this a shot. Let's see how this works. Let's track the data. Hey, this tends to work in a concept like a deli concept, but doesn't work in a full service concept. Or this works in a hamburger place, not any place else. This works at a bar. It is kind of cool to see that technology, use that data, and be able to combine in there. But to answer your original question of the off the shelf or build, it's always going to be a combination. We're going to take something off the shelf. We're going to have them build it. We're going to tweak it. We're going to figure out how to integrate it, and then we're going to go from there.
It's probably mainly going to be in the reporting and integration side that you need something that others may not, right, to consolidate.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, but I'd also say it's just in the functionality sometimes too, right? If everybody's trying to integrate to the POS, for instance, some of those integrations don't necessarily play nicely to each other. So we have to decide what is something that we can use because it's nice to have versus what's required. What can we change? What can we not change? Even when you think little things, even just on mobile ordering, when you set up for mobile ordering and we have multiple concepts coming off the same POS, you have to figure out, how do I get things to just print to the right spot, right? Is this worth the integration or is it not worth the integration? Right. What's the way I work around it?
And it may be standalone. That is what you did say.
And it may be standalone. Sometimes it may be standalone.
Are you primarily off the shelf, or do you have a lot of custom applications besides the integration and some of the pieces to work?
For us, much like Todd, it's a balance of both. I think there's so much good tech out there that once you understand the experience, there's not a lot you have to build. We've built some, that we thought was worthwhile. We've mostly looked at things, again, there's some great partners out there that you can kind of, buy that modify type of approach to it. I think to the point it comes down to what's the experiences you're trying to create. By the way, it also means looking sometimes outside your space. Things we've done around computer vision and artificial intelligence, we built point of sale around that 4 years ago that was actually based off manufacturing. And it was what, companies use to sort and, navigate manufacturing parts. And I think that the point I make to that is don't be afraid to kind of branch out and think a little bit different. Right. You can create a feasible whole out of infeasible parts.
Well, that is a good point. Just because it doesn't exist in your specific vertical doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Looking at the travel industry, looking at the retail industry, manufacturing, a lot of times these technologies are there, or other parts of the world. You'll find a technology that can be used. You guys have some additional challenges that people may not think about. And again, this is not whether you're a big company or a small company, it would be the same no matter which. You have to change on a dime. And I'm not talking about a pandemic that comes that everybody can't come in and sit down and eat. I'm talking about if you're working a hospital that, all of a sudden there's an emergency or something and the meals go like that, or if you're in an airport and travel has to stop, it goes like this, or if all planes are snowed in and they can't go somewhere, that these things happen. And how do you adequately also prepare, or how should one think about being prepared in your environment for the ups and downs that can occur in a moment's notice?
I'll give it a shot since Peter's looking around first. I will say it is hard. It's you have to be flexible. You have to be, use whatever data you have, use whatever insight you have. You have to be able to, delays. After a while, you learn, what to expect, right? A long delay, a terrible, massive snowstorm actually doesn't help us because people just stay home, right? They just don't go to the flight to begin with. A quick moving snowstorm coming in is great for us, to be honest. That's just everybody at the airport and then they're stuck there for a while.
Or thunder and lightning.
Or thunder and lightning or something short term. Pandemic is not so great for us. But, it's just a matter about being flexible, being prepared and trying to understand. Again, as we talked about earlier, when I really think about how busy, the worst thing that always happens, of course, is that's when there's system issues, right? When there's a massive rush that you weren't expecting. And it's really just how to handle that. And of course, the operators are the ones on the ground. They're the ones that really have to be flexible on keeping hours open, when to use overtime, when not to use overtime, when to keep staff longer than scheduled, when to change those operating hours. And they all have the flexibility to do that, based on what's happening in real time. And then on a system issue, as we kind of talked about earlier, that we can't just send a tech out there anytime we want to fix things anyway, that you got to plan ahead. So
you have to be self-sufficient too, don't you?
You do. You have to be self-sufficient. You have to have redundancy built in. You have to have backup plans on backup plans. That kind of stuff is always important. There's, when I think about the airports, we're going to have a mass rush at certain times. It's not going to be steady throughout the day normally. There's ups and downs, and you can't risk being offline on any system really for even an hour if that's the busy time, because there's not going to be a makeup time afterwards. And people can't stick around until you get things back. They got planes to catch. So we do usually really think things through about what the backup is, what's our backup to our backup, what happens in this scenario, and there's a lot of game planning before opening. Now,
but it's also a lot of partnerships and working with other people. You got to work with the airport, you got to work with the passengers, you got to work with the airlines, you got to work, all of it, right?
Yep, and fortunately or unfortunately, it really falls on our ops guys, right? It's really about the director of operations and the people on the field on how well they're prepared and how well they react in a crisis.
Peter, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, look, Todd said it right. And it's, it is tough because it all falls in the operations, and operators, and someone who, early on in my years was that person. I think the great thing is you're always learning. Our company, I always love because, 270,000 associates that just really care about what they do, learn every day, try to get better, but also are prepared and know what's going to happen when we do things. And I think from, it's, being prepared, like Todd said, having multiple redundancies for your redundancies. And by the way, some of those redundancies are be ready to start counting stuff out in a box type of thing, because it may run there. But, how do you handle your architecture, your technology, your people most important? When something happens, how are they make sure they're ready for it? What we have done and what we've seen is through, what we've been spending a lot of time is freeing a lot of our data and making sure we're learning, adding the variables, adding those other services that say, okay, look, when it rains on a baseball game, by the way, it's a great thing for us because everybody buys beer when it rains. Didn't know if you knew that, but you all buy beer when it rains. And so thank you. When you come from back stadiums, please buy lots of beer and hopefully it'll rain a lot. But I think it's like knowing what your data can do and being ready to provide the sources to do that. Having those systems in place and those processes in place, but remembering who your people are, making sure that you are there, that we've got IT people that are standing by ready to help our operators. We don't care what time it is. We've done things when the country shut down, we went right into action. We actually made changes over a weekend so the managers knew how they could resource effectively, and putting systems in place. And I think when you go through it once or twice, you'll learn how to be better at it. And over time, you'll just get really where it's, quite honestly, we always say in our company, when things like that happen, that's where we're kind of at our best. We're really good at this, and can react and respond when you've got millions of people relying on you every single day.
And people don't know that your company also does some very large events. Unfortunately, the Olympics were canceled this summer, but you guys do things like the Olympics as well, where you're gearing up for a 2 to 3 week period of time. And then that's it, right? So.
And it's all of that. I mean, it's, people come to work and lunchtime's like, it's really, your business is in 90 minutes. How you do that. A hospital, again, our wonderful caregivers right now, they've got very short shifts and breaks. We've got to get them where they are, and you've got to meet people closer to where, because those minutes are really where your business is. You could talk about stadiums and things like that. It's like, it's a matter of a few hours for a few million transactions. You're down to minutes. You got to understand how you're ready for those minutes, what you learn in those minutes that happen, and then what you do afterwards to get ready for the next round. And I think when you get to those, thinking through those cycles and thinking through that information, getting it in a way that's a process after that, my gosh, for those of you, you're going to be ready for anything.
Yeah, I suspect it's the same thing, as Todd already said, in the airport environment, but of course you may have multi-operators there too, the people that service the planes and things like that from the different side. I would just remind people that if you have questions, we've gotten a few in, please submit them into the Q&A tab, because we're going to start our Q&A in about 5 or 6 minutes from now. And so please feel free to submit them there. A lot of people have talked about COVID and the pandemic, and the word pivot, has come up a lot. So I wonder what happens when you are, either one of you, doing operations that are so heavily dependent upon air traffic, travel on the highways, travel to trains, stadiums being filled with people, universities going back to school. Are there ways that your businesses, in fact, have pivoted? I mean, some of the best, if I go to a ballpark, I'm always getting a hot dog. I don't know why the hot dogs taste differently there. I have no idea, because they're the same hot dogs, but they do. And so, have either one of your companies pivoted in such a way to serve the communities around you by actually delivering stuff and giving them that experience, even though they can't come and take it? Now, maybe Todd, I could get an airline meal, but that's not you. I know. But they don't do that anymore. I'd get a bag of peanuts and a pretzel, right? But anyway, sorry.
Right. Now we actually started. I mean, when this was happening, we shifted it very much, into kind of a different way of modeling. From first and foremost, right? We serve hospitals across the globe. We have caregivers that are taking care of all of us, and working amazing jobs and doing wonderful things. We immediately said, okay, now they're all working more hours. Let's get things set up for them to take stuff home. While we're getting them fed too, you should set. So we did pop-up grocery stores. By the way, that started roughly about 2 days after, kind of everybody announced that the country was going to shut down. We were in 48 hours, we're operating those. We are doing things, again, like kits to home. There are businesses where food is free at work, but obviously it's not free when you're home. But we've actually done things where we're now kind of more e-commerce focused, where we're creating things that you can get to your house, where we can, again, if you can't come to the food will come to you, and it's always been a methodology. One of our presidents always says that. It's bringing food to the people and people to the food. That doesn't change in a pandemic. The execution point does. So, and again, in the higher education spaces where we maybe can't get as close to the students as we'd like to, we're leveraging things like robotics. We have now 6 universities that are doing robotic delivery. We're leveraging automation to make sure spaces are safer for people to come in. So we're making pivots in very different ways. But again, yes, and Rob, you've been thinking about
those pivots that you did are some of those are things you may have wanted to do, but now they got moved a lot quicker. And some of the things are things that you probably didn't think of that will be ongoing, opportunities.
Yeah, I think it is right. I mean, most of the things around automation, we were ready for. It just accelerated. Automation was absolutely accelerated from a pandemic because automation can play a role, a good one. Some things though were just, again, this whole idea of, pop-up grocery stores and and selling, and doing food to home were things we hadn't thought of. But, when you think about it, you're like, wow, this is not a bad idea. Will they stick around afterwards? Some might. I think they might, where we think about doing our business differently. We didn't realize how much, I think in some instances, how valuable you were until you weren't there.
Our pivots were a little different, obviously. being all in airports when airline traffic really dried up to nothing, obviously that had an effect. The little things we were able to do, we did pivot for a while we focused on really giving massively discounted food to the airport employees, right? Airports themselves were usually still open. There were still emergency flights, still a lot of different kind of flights, especially depending on the area. You know, Chicago, for instance, was still a big place to receive bags of international people. So a lot of those employees were working very long shifts. And when they left, it's not like they could go get a restaurant, go out to eat afterwards. So we were selling food basically at cost for the airport employees, of all things, to be able to just have food on the way out. It benefited them as they were able to get meals at the end of a long day. Benefit us is that we were able to keep people employed, keep staying some places open, doing nothing but airport employee stuff. We obviously sped up a lot of the contactless technology. To Peter's point, a lot of it was already on the roadmap. A lot of it had already been experimented with or in pilot, and that really pushed it forward big time. Mobile ordering, order at the table, so you can order from a device. Obviously, all our menus now are on QR codes. You scan with your phone when you sit down. You can pull up the entire menu if you had a sit-down place. So a lot of that technology really got sped up quickly. And even during the shutdown, we focused on what would a reopening look like? What's going to happen next? How are people going to expect to it, right? Especially in a pandemic, even those traveling, we expected behavior changes. And we started off this entire session talking about the customer experience and what they expected and being able to keep that up at the branch. Well, the expectation of what they would have moving forward is going to be completely different. What they expect to see, what they expect to be able to do, how they expect to interact with servers, all that was going to change. So we spent a lot of this time while the business was obviously a lot slower to try to implement those changes faster so we'd be ready when we reopen.
So that actually brings up a question, and we can shift into the Q&A side because somebody asked this question. You know, you guys are in a unique experience, a unique environment where you may see things that are going to change customer behavior before the brands do, because they may or may not, you know, have certain restrictions and things around them. You know, what are the changes that you both believe are going to be changes, either they're coming from where you are now and they will go into the general food service environment, but what are those behavioral changes that they think they need to be prepared for? And then the second half of that question actually was, and how may technology help to meet those changes?
I mean, for me personally, stuff we just talked about, I think are here to stay. I think there's going to be more and more mobile ordering. There's more and more order at the table at the restaurants, whether or not it's from your phone or from a little kiosk on the table or whatever it is. I think days of handing them the old plastic menus that somebody cleaned off real quick, and the plastic that still looks a little stained may be a little past. More people are looking for, at the very minimum, paper menus or QR menus or something that could do it. They're looking for less contact. I think for a quick service environment, order ahead has really taken off. Just being able to order ahead, even if you go pick it up, even if they're standing really right there, the virtual kiosk, which has taken a big jump up. In fact, even kiosk use, which I have to tell you, initially we thought that would actually take a hit down. People wouldn't want to touch it after other people. Our kiosk use has actually skyrocketed. With people just would rather order from a tablet or from their phone than stand in front of the cashier and order and stay up there for a long time.
The interesting thing about the kiosk piece is that we did a webinar within the last few months about that. And originally at the start of the pandemic, people thought kiosks were dead, that they were things that people were thinking about. And then you go in the grocery stores and you see all the kiosks that are in there now and the self. And so maybe they're not so dead, right? And Peter, I think you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, the point is that, look, some things are going to change. You know, as we hopefully get through this, you know, consumers will do a little bit more. The one thing that is going to continue to accelerate is having a digital first mindset in what you do. Mobile is going to be important. By the way, it's going to need to be different. You know, the ones that are going to succeed coming through this and out of this are the ones that look at their mobile platform and say, it's not good enough. And it needs to do better. It needs to be more experience focused. It needs to be less around the constraints and wireframes of the technology. Those companies will succeed. The ones that say, I got mobile ordering, check box, that's not enough. You know, I've got content, check box, not enough. So I think you have to really accelerate your thinking. I think, by the way, you're spot on with kiosks. That's not going to change. Although the advent of, things where my mobile device and, things, geofencing and whatever can know me as I arrive, the experience layers onto it are what are going to be most important. I have it is fine today. It's terrible tomorrow, right? And I think the biggest piece, so if I left with anything, it's you've got to continue your digital roadmap. Your roadmap has to keep going. There is no success in digital when you really look at it. And by the way, if you look at anything, right, success is a terrible word, right? It's nothing succeeds like it, nothing fails like it either. So what are those next steps? How do you evolve it? Because the digital connection between you and the consumer, that's here to stay and only going to get stronger, harder, faster. And I think, quite honestly, if you don't, you're going to become dependent upon technologies that might have a negative influence to your balance sheet, that you're going to lose control over. And I think that you're going to become too dependent on to make it really, truly successful for you.
I think that's some good advice. We have another question here, and I'm not sure. I guess it's for both of you. If you're a independent local operator and you want to work with an organization like yours at an airport or at a stadium or something, what is it that they should be thinking about in advance of either approaching you about doing that, or if you're interested in doing it, what should they be prepared to do? Todd, you might want to go first. You were very good about talking about all the different contracts and requirements and things that you get from different brands, but
Right.
what if you guys are the operator and they want to do some work in an environment that you're operating?
So, right. So I don't want to speak too much for our business development group that would actually have, I'm sure, their own list of requirements. I can only say on the second hand, what I would recommend from anybody is that if you're at the spot where you're a local operator, then your operations, you know how to run operations, and you're the expert in operations, and you should voice that opinion to us because we can learn a lot. We always do learn a lot from our operators, especially in a market, on how they operate. On the flip side, we ask that if you want to partner with us, it's because you recognize we're an expert in our space. And a lot of times there's some give and take about, we can learn some of the operations, but when it comes to dealing with the airports and what needs to happen, to trust us as the experts. Whether or not that means, working with our technology versus yours, or changing the guest experience a little bit, but still give the same overall feeling, or to understand even just timelines. It's one of the biggest things when our business developers talk to potential partners, that there's a lot of give and take, that it's not about the same way that you opened a restaurant on the street side. It's very different. So trust us, we'll trust you, and together that could be a great partnership.
Peter, they want to partner with you?
Yeah, I think it's, first when you come to us, it's, why, right? I always say, kind of, I mean, not in a negative way, but like, why is it important to you? What do you want to get out of it? Making sure that, there has to be, to Todd's point, a relationship. There are things that we're going to want you to do. There are things that we're going to actually have to ask you to do. Because again, different from you as an independent retailer, we have this client in the middle, and love clients, but there's complexity when it comes with that. So it's, what do you want to get? Why do you want to do this? Why is this important to you? What do you want to get after it? So make sure that, one, we position you the right way, that we put you in the places that make you successful towards that goal, right? That, you're clear and going into it with very kind of wide-eyed, and aware, because there are things, that are different. We have much more security in the way we do things. Food safety is a little bit more stringent in these types of venues. And, the things that you will be asked to do may be different than you've done before. Can your business adjust to that, handle that? And is it important to you at the end of the day? I think we love, we grew up in a very entrepreneurial thing. I mean, as a company, it's who we are. So we're never going to say, like, don't approach us, of course, and we want you to hear for it. And I can't, again, to Todd's point, there's another group that handles all of that. But I would say, look, it's just always know why you're doing it. I ask the same thing of the technology companies that I work with. Why is it different? Why does it matter to you? We'll figure out why it matters to me, but it always must matter to both. When everybody wins, the only way to roll.
So you're
right. Let me throw in one thing there.
Go ahead, Todd.
And so one thing, when you say why, let me take away a carrot right there. If you think it's because you can charge whatever price you want and people are going to pay for it, that's just not the real case.
Right.
A lot of people have that impression.
Some jurisdictions actually control that as well in that because they want pricing to the local market. You know, I want to let's be a little more specific on this question, because I know when I talk to a lot of people who are thinking about franchising and they didn't do it before, and you know, the advice I would give them is go ahead and make sure that your technology is your asset. Go ahead and standardize it before you start franchising, so it's part of the package, because not all your franchisees are going to be sophisticated and they may need your help, which is to Todd's point, you know, where he's saying you should trust that they know their piece as well. But if you were going to give some advice of somebody getting their house in order, you know, in order to operate effectively and match up, are there some technology things that you look for? You know, obviously you can sit there and say, well, we'll just use ours and, you know, that's great. But are there some things that you look for operationally that they should be prepared for when they may come to you?
You know, from the technology standpoint, we look at, do you do anything around the back of the house? Like the front of the house stuff, we're really good at it. You know, we of course could always be better, but we're good at it. That's not where you need us. Your brand, this face of who you are, it's not your technology, it's your food, you know, or whatever, right? Your apparel you sell or whatever you do. You know, the processes you do in the back, how much of that, I've looked at it, what do you digitize, if anything? And how does that help us as we look to work together to make sure that we can enable you as well as, you know, you enable us? So I don't necessarily think that the technology is never one of those things. Quite honestly, we've worked with a ton of brands that they have no technology plan whatsoever. They're fantastic, right? I think everybody can probably list their favorite place to eat, and it probably has the worst technology out there. That's okay. We can enable that through what we do. I think as long as you've got that strong brand value, technology is not the point. If you do some things, it's great. If you're open to listening to things, that's even better.
I would add that prepare to come in and tell us what you need when you're talking. When you talk technology, you're really talking data, right? Tell us what data you need in your brand or your concept to be successful. Don't tell us how you got there. We might ask, we might need it, it might come in handy, but start with what information you need, what data you need, because it's very possible in the systems we already have that have already been vetted and already work for our environment can get you that same data. And that's probably an easier way to start than to start with your technology, trying to make it work with us. It's better to use our technology, but still get you the same data that you ultimately need to be successful.
Well, I'm going to tell you that tomorrow I have another panel, but it's the operator side of this, and it'll be interesting to see how their comments line up. You know, when they're either self-op or when they're working with a provider as well in it. We have two questions that I'd like to wrap up with, but I actually am only going to ask one because you'll understand why I can't. One was, what's your favorite brand to work with? I think we're going to skip that one. And of course, the correct answer is all of them. But I think that, it is a challenging environment that you both work in. And it has a lot of ups and downs and a lot of things that I'm sure many people who sat on this webinar never thought about. What is the most exciting thing about working in, the non-traditional, on-site, a multi-concept, single location type of environment? So Peter, do you want to take that, and Todd, you can close?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I've been in this space for 21 years. I love this space. I don't know why I'd ever, leave it. And when I tell people about you're out of your mind, go work for something simpler. What you can see and what's next and what you can do, especially in my role selfishly, we can be very exploratory. We've tried things in technology that everyone's looked at us and said, you're stupid, that won't work. You can't make that work. You can't scale, whatever, right? And we've done it. And we've also done it where it hasn't worked, and we know that. So I think it's a very open world. More so, by the way, in the pandemic, people have gotten more free to say, look, let's explore. That whole methodology of fail fast has started to come to fruition, and less a statement that maybe in the past might have not been true. So I think this ability to try new things in this market is what makes it great. And again, I go back to, come from a very data-focused background in both marketing and technology side. The information you can learn, it comes at you so fast and from so many places. it makes it so wild and exciting. You want to keep kind of going at it every day. So I think that's the parts that I look at that make this space really fun. All the complexities aside, still a great way to really think about doing things differently.
Yeah,
So
and
Todd, you get the closing word on that.
I'm going to second it. I'm going to repeat it. And I kind of mentioned earlier that any new technology I see anywhere in the hospitality world, I can try it out somewhere. I guarantee you there's a brand we have or a concept we have that could benefit from it or try it, at least see they benefit from it. So I get to have fun. I get to try different things. I get to say I work for a table service, a quick service, a bar, deli kind of grab and go, whatever it is, retail. If I want to try new technology, there's there. And I'm lucky in that SSP, one of our core values is always to be open to new ideas. Our operators, you mentioned earlier, Rob, you asked about operators that train in different units, multi-concepts. They're flexible as well. So we don't have a lot of, this is how we've always done it, because they wouldn't survive in this industry. There's a lot of learning the new ways and being able to be flexible. And that makes it a great, fun world and a fun way. There's always a new challenge and a new technology I can try.
Great. Well, that's a great way to end, with the ability to take a look at all kinds of new things as well and see things that most people can't get to see, and try them out and try things out. And hopefully not too many mistakes in there, but you do get to try them out and see how it works. And you certainly get a large customer base, both of you. So I want to thank our panel today. Both of you, I think, added a lot. Different perspectives. It's interesting. Some of you both work in some environments similarly, but in reality, you look at things differently. We didn't even get into the international world in this, but I think that there was a lot of information here about some of the changes, but at the end of the day, you do need to deliver on customer experience. You do need to collect data and provide that information to run yourselves and operate for the others. You do have the challenges of the multi-concept environment, but also you need to be able to react quickly. And actually, some of the things that you guys talked about are not so different than some of those pivoting challenges that some of the independents and the locally based restaurants have done. So I want to thank you both for your time on the panel. I want to thank our audience for sending some great questions over. And I certainly want to thank Square, our sponsor for today. And again, Square, as you all know, offers third-party software integration that syncs with all kinds of management software, and offers the contactless. And if you want information on that, you should visit square.com. And then last but not least, I certainly want to thank the Western Food Service Expo for hosting us today, Clarion, Tech Bites, and of course, we invite you after this to listen to the webinars and be able to download them at foodandbeverageshows.com, the ifbta.org, and also at square.com. And thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.